It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Welcome, Quiller Nation, to another exciting episode of Don't Quill the Messenger. I'm so excited to welcome our guest today. He is filmmaker Timothy Scott Bogart, and he has a film that has just been released. It is called Juliet and Romeo, of course, based on the William Shakespeare play of the reverse name. It has a magnificent new twist to it that I think you will find delightful. And you can find it. It is released, and it has been out for about a week now at the time that you are listening to this. And we have him here today to talk about the film, the inspiration for it, the process that he had to go through to get it made, and the music, yes, music that is involved in this delightful, fun new take on the Star-Crossed Lovers classic. Tim, welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger.
Such a pleasure to be here.
So, of course, the first question I have for you, because I screened the film, my wife and I watched it together, very delightful, lots of fun.
Oh.
The first question I have for you is, what sparks the imagination? What causes the impetus, the inspiration to turn Romeo and Juliet into a musical? Now, I know, of course, we have West Side Story, but that doesn't really, that's so loosely based that I don't know that it really counts the way that this film definitely counts, because this is the same story with your, pop musical twist on it. Tell me a little bit about that.
Absolutely. And there are some additional historical twists, but the interesting part of where all that comes from. But yes, as Shakespeare said, the play is the thing. The music is the thing. But it did begin, it actually began really at the beginning of my personal career when I was directing stage. And while directing on the stage, I directed Romeo and Juliet, the play, Shakespeare's play, a number of times. And candidly, I always felt like I kind of failed. I mean, the audiences had a good time, but I always felt, gosh, there's more about these characters that I think we could explore. There's more about this parental relationship that I personally wish I knew more of. And yet that was the text. And while those themes were unbelievably modern and incredibly resonant, there was always this kind of part going, gosh, I think there's more there, but I sort of left that alone. And then it was years and years later, I happened to see Shakespeare in Love. I was like, Tom Stoppard, you did it, darn you. Like, he had really figured out a different way in to tell that story. And I thought a broader way. Now, obviously, he based his on the actual Shakespeare and did that as the love story to mirror where his writing inspiration came from. But it was actually about 10 years ago when I was at a lunch with my brother, Evan Bogart, who did write all the music for the film. He also wrote things like Halo for Beyonce and SOS for Rihanna, amazing pop songwriter. I remember sitting with him, and I was struggling with the script at the time because I was going for a more relatable, accessible dialogue while still, being as true to the world, if not true to iambic pentameter. So I remember asking him, why do you think Shakespeare used iambic pentameter? And he very casually said, well, because that was the poetry of his time. And I thought that was very interesting. I said, so what's the poetry of our time? He said, music, pop music. And he paused for a second. I looked at him, and then we really started talking about it, thinking about every generation, not just today's younger generation, but every generation's personal connection with their music, and how their music isn't something they listen to. It's something they are. It's something that drives them. It's something that is their compass. And it really sort of started striking me about music as inner voice really does speak to the things that perhaps we can't find the words to say. And when I started thinking about Shakespeare himself, thinking, gosh, that's what inner monologue really is about. And Shakespeare so brilliantly captured these inner feelings of these characters. So that kind of started me on this crazy path of, could music be a window into these remarkable Shakespearean themes, but find a way far more accessibly to allow younger audiences today to really understand that. That then led me to start researching, where I was rather shocked to discover that Mr. Shakespeare, in fact, had not come up with the characters or the plot lines or the twists or the rest of that. He had actually based his play whole cloth on multiple novels that had been written before him, an incredible poem by Arthur Brooke from the UK, a Parisian author, Italian authors, all the way back to the actual historical context where the only records at the time were church.
The Italian.
But he's probably of all the Italian authors, of which there are 4, his Bandellas is probably the most sourced piece for Shakespeare, along with Arthur Brooke's poem. Arthur Brooke was a UK poet. So those were probably the 2 strongest. But even when you went all the way back to history, you realize in 1301, where the story is meant to take place, the only records were from the church. Birth records, death records, land right records. And ultimately, that is the source material that everyone, Bandello, Brooke, clearly Mr. Shakespeare, all relied upon. And I started to think about, well, what is the authenticity of the source material? And how might one have skewed that if they had different plans in mind? And so all of that was a long journey, which took me 10 more years to figure it out. But there was a couple key aha moments like that for me.
Well, it is I love the fact that it is very historical, not only in its setting, but in its look. Some of the costumes have a little bit of a modern flair to them.
Yep.
But one of the things I will say, I mean, obviously you come from a musical background. It's not uncommon Shakespeare has music in many of his plays, if not almost all of them. So it's not unusual for there to be music in a Shakespeare play. But I did find it, it's a beautiful film. First of all, let me say it's just stunning.
Thank you so much.
Your DP and your scenic designer,
Byron Werner, our director. I just got to shout out, but also production design by the great Dante Ferretti. I mean, there's really no real production designer, I think, with the scope and breadth of that design. It was the honor of a lifetime to work with him. But so when you mentioned the costumes, Luciano Capozzi did such a brilliant job. And to your point about some of the modernization, we really searched about the authenticity first, but also understanding that Verona as a place at the time was a big trading post. And so as wealthy families at the time, the Montagues and the Capulets, they would have had access to sort of the coming fashions, right? I like we just had, Fashion Week, but sort of the coming fashions, because we were leaving the medieval times and moving into the Renaissance. So I did want to give them a little bit of what was coming next as the wealthier families. But yes, the design was, those 3 people just knocked me out of my socks.
Now, it's on location, obviously, you can tell that. Tell us a little bit about the locations, and obviously it's in Italy.
Yes.
And you had a lot of there's a lot of Italian names in the credits. So you had to work with a team of primarily Italians is what it seemed to me.
That's exactly right. So the moment I decided to do this, I remember speaking to my producing partner, Jessica Martins, and saying, if we're going to live in this world where music takes us to another place, where there's almost this fantastical element of inner voice, and every other thing has to be absolutely authentic, because audiences today, especially younger audiences today, they need authenticity or they just don't connect the same way. And once we decided that, there really was no other choice but Italy. I mean, Italy is where the story is supposed to take place. I spent months with Byron and our DP and Dante, our production designer, searching castle after castle every day, to the farthest reaches from the north to the south, to find places that we really could basically place a camera anywhere and you would feel like you were back in 1301. This was never going to be on a soundstage. I was never going to use a green screen. I felt authenticity was everything, but that extended to, didn't matter how hard or inaccessible the locations were, if they felt real, that was more important. We were shooting during the winter. So it was unbelievably cold.
You can see that in the film. Snow. There are moments where you have actors who are speaking or singing and you can see their breath. And I made a comment to my wife. I'm like, man, it's really cold there because look at that. You could see their breath.
When we were doing one of the first scenes with Clare Rugard, who plays our amazing Juliet, we were in the Capulet estate, and she starts having smoke coming out of her mouth. And I remember our completely Italian crew turning to me and saying, in Italian or broken English, were we going to use visual effects, or we're going to put ice chips? And I said, no, in 1301, this is where they'd be. This is how cold it would be. And this is what would happen. And that's what we were going for. So the location really was so crucial to, frankly, everything.
Did any of the actors complain about the cold?
Every minute of every day.
Well, nice to know that actors are true to their ilk.
No, look, it was unbelievably cold. So yes, for the actors who, granted, Byron, myself, our producer, we all had giant ski parkas and things, but sometimes we'd have our cast out there with just a shirt. It was really cool for them.
Yeah, you can see that in the film, and it does add a level of authenticity. And I remember thinking to myself, as a producer director, obviously I've never made a film, but in dealing with actors regularly, I was like, man, I'll bet those actors were bitching and moaning and wailing about the
They were, but appropriately. They were, but I understood it. I knew it coming in. They were unbelievable troopers at the end, but it was cold. They deserved to complain.
But it was necessary. I mean, the locations are magnificent. I have to tell you, and I think one of the greatest compliments I can give you is I'm watching the film, and immediately all I could think about is it has such a Zeffirelli feel to it. In the look, and in the locations, in the authenticity, in the vividness of the colors and the costumes. And of course, Zeffirelli was a big opera director before he was a film director. And here you have this blending of music and theater and film happening in your movie, and I thought you really captured the flavor of him, and he's one of my favorites. So kudos to you.
It deserves to be. Thank you for that. That's a high praise indeed.
So the next question I have for you, this is a giant family affair. You mentioned that it's your brother was involved with, wrote all the music. I saw that another Bogart was involved in assisting you in the direction.
My brother Brad. Well, so actually, we had three family members.
The Martin family, you have
also.
Your choreographers have the same last name. I don't know if that's two brothers or husband and wife.
They are. Jeff and Rick Cooperman are brothers, and they are two brothers, and they are among the most sought after, most wonderful choreographers on Broadway, and they also do film. But they are just brilliant with the muscularity of their choreography. I just fell in love with them instantly. But on family front, that's correct. So Evan Bogart, working with his partner Justin Gray and a bunch of other songwriters, wrote all the songs, produced all the music. My brother Brad Bogart was also a producer with us on location with my key producer Jessica Martins and myself. And then my daughter, Quinn Bogart, who may be in the worst parenting recommendation in history, I suggested she drop out of NYU Film School for a year and come to Italy and be my second unit director, who I could really trust. And did the most brilliant job directing second unit, while also acting in the film. So sometimes she'd be directing in full costume. It was quite something.
That's fantastic. So it's really a labor of love and quite the passion project. How do you, now, if you don't mind me asking, what's the budget on a film like this?
This is a very big independent film.
It's huge.
It is a $40 million film that for the independent world is quite large. For the studio, world, it's not. But we were trying to aspire and to approach the film with the same scope, scale, and intent as any studio film out there. And that was one of the benefits of shooting overseas. We were able to use these real locations. We didn't have to build those things. So it was a very big production. We had 400 crew members that we had to travel with us, with their horses and their carriages and fire and madness. So it was quite a big circus we were bouncing around.
The choral level is astounding. I mean, the amount of bodies, and then of course they're not just background people. They're not just supernumeraries. Yep. They have to be able to sing, and some of them have to be able to dance. And like you said, you have men on stilts, you have clowns, you have jugglers, you have fire breathers. I mean, that's not just like, okay, we're going to throw together a quick movie. That's a big production, sir.
It is, and thank you for that. I always find it very funny and odd in our business that extras, which is what people call them, right? The people that aren't our main actors on the call sheet, are people that normally a director doesn't even know about until the day, and they suddenly appear. They don't know if they're doing a movie on Mars or underwater, and yet they're in your frame. And so I've always found that very odd, and I've always looked to hire dancers to be my extras and actually make them characters, because when you have dancers, they understand, of course, the specificity and detail of every bit of choreography, even if it's not dancing, just physically moving through your space and hitting certain marks. So just from a physicality standpoint, I really like to use real dancers who understand the movement of body as the people filling our frame. But then on top of that, every single character had a character that then the costume was specifically designed for, the props were specifically designed for. There was really nobody just standing around in this one. That's absolutely true, but an enormous amount of work to do that.
You made a choice that I found very interesting. There's a character in the film that basically, for lack of a better term, she's like one of the concubines in the brothel.
Yes.
And she is a major role. In fact,
yes, she is.
By my count, the line count, the solos are almost equal, if not equal, to Juliet. And so you create this sort of subsequent leading role as part of the fabric of the community of Verona, which I thought helped bring us into the world of Verona. But tell me about that decision and that choice to almost overshadow the size of Juliet with this other female lead.
Gosh, well, thank you for seeing that and feeling that. That's a character that I actually created, the role of Veronica, played by the amazing Martina Ortiz-Luis.
She got a beautiful voice.
Oh God, a breathtaking voice, an incredible actress. From the moment I began really thinking about why I thought the play for me didn't explore as much as it could, I always thought, my gosh, there's so much other world for both the grown-up audience, but also the younger audience. And I always would look specifically at, perhaps the most, at this point, the movie will have already been out, so people will know some things. But, the idea that almost in every version, adaptation on stage and in movies, whatever that I've seen, one of the most consequential moments is the battle between Tybalt from the Capulet side and Mercutio from the Montague side. And I always felt, gosh, we don't know enough about either of them to care as much as we're supposed to. And that started leading me to, but I don't really know enough about a lot of these people to care as much as I think we could. And so building out a true world where these are all friends, where it's Friday night. I mean, when you bring up her character, yes, it's Friday night. And the kids are like going to town and hanging out at a club and there's music playing. And yes, the character Veronica is singing, but understanding that all these characters had inner lives, inner hopes, inner dreams, which then Veronica is the love interest of the Mercutio character, and understanding their relationship. Tybalt has a relationship with the Rosaline character played by the great music artist Taylor Parts. So giving each one of these characters greater scope, greater breadth, felt to me like it actually ultimately informed the world and the consequences that Juliet and Romeo found themselves in. But I thought that world and those characters and those people were essential to making that work.
You make some name changes and you, as we just mentioned, you add some characters. And you also talked about how you delve into the historical foundations, especially 1301. And one of the things that's very important, of course, is the Scala family who were
yes, I don't know if the last time you've been in Italy, but like their mark, the Scala family is everywhere.
Oh yes, I've been to the Scala. There's the 4 tombs there in the courtyard together in Verona, just outside of the public square.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I was there just a little under 2 years ago. And of course, I did like the Shakespeare tour. That was my thing. I wanted to go to all those spots. And but you keep the name of Aeschylus for the Duke. You don't change it to Scala. I mean, it's close. Obviously, that's what Shakespeare was deriving from. Well,
that's correct.
How did you, and was it a committee of folks involved when you were making these decisions about names, about characters, about those types of decisions? How are those decisions made in the process?
Well, the decisions, ultimately, I wish there was maybe a bigger committee. Ultimately, it really came down to my producing partner, Jessica, and myself, kind of banding them about. But ultimately, I thought the key at the beginning, I thought it was so important that audience coming in, look, Romeo and Juliet is arguably, maybe with the exception of the Bible, the most well-known and beloved story in all of literature, with these characters being the most beloved characters in all of literature. I mean, it's just so well known. And so there is a sense that I think people have that they know the story. When you start drilling into people, maybe some of them, read some of it in high school, or they saw the play and they tried to get to the end of Pentameter. There's a lot of other world there that I don't think they got. So I felt it was important to have as many anchors, though, as we possibly could. So I tried to stay as true to the majority of the characters I could. And, the Scala family is something that so clearly is the inspiration for Prince Aeschylus and the royals at the time. And yet I felt, because no one had really played with that name, I felt that was smarter to keep in the world of the characters we think we know and that are easily recognizable, which then would allow me to really expand on those characters that we didn't necessarily know. But even a character like Rosaline, who clearly is referenced in the play, but very few people realize the character of Rosaline, who Romeo is supposed to be in love with at the beginning, never exists in the physical play. So giving life to characters that were within Shakespeare's context already, I thought was more important focus, if I could, than shifting something else where I felt changing Aeschylus to Scala. I didn't know that it would benefit us ultimately, other than be fun to do. I wanted to create as much anchor as we could that allowed me the freedom around it.
Conversely, you minimize one of what I believe is one of the most favored characters in the play, which is the nurse. And she becomes very minimal in your version.
Yes.
Also a lot younger than usually portrayed as well.
Also true, but age is an interesting thing, and the thing about adaptation in general. First of all, I think Shakespeare was always meant to be adapted. It's why, because it's all about the brilliance of those themes, but it's why literally for the last hundreds and hundreds of years, you can find a Romeo and Juliet being adapted, a new version of it, in virtually every city and every state on every day around the world. Like it is meant to be adapted. One day it's let's do it as World War II characters, or it's Baz Luhrmann, let's make it Venice, California, and make horses, cars. So there's always an approach to adapt, and I do think, oddly, I think that Romeo and Juliet is probably Shakespeare's poppiest novel, the poppiest play, because it is about the youth. It is his most young skewing piece, I believe. But in terms of age, people would bring up, Juliet's character per Shakespeare should be 14 or 15. That may be true, but life expectancy was 30, right? So she would have been promised to marriage halfway through her life. Even if you take Shakespeare's time, when we think he wrote it around 1595, life expectancy was 40, not 80 today. So I did feel age mattered. Therefore, the reverse is true with the nurse, where I felt I needed to bring her down a little bit in terms of age. So I felt there was a greater connection with them. But I always felt that the nurse was portrayed, I guess most often, a little bit more playfully and silly to some degree, maybe a little, unclear what was really happening. And I was trying across the board to create as an authentic a world as possible. I will tell you, Sara Lazaro, who played the nurse, did a beautiful job. And I did have a number of scenes that I ultimately, sadly, had to cut out because as I tried to keep it as close to 2 hours as I could, I got to 2:01. But she's a wonderful character. It's a complicated character, but ultimately there's only so much film we could fit. And that was one of the sacrifices we had to make.
One of the things that I thought was interesting about the film is the way that you also expand the role of the apothecary. And I love the spoiler alert, but I love the revelation that occurs between he and Friar Lawrence at one point in the film, where you realize the apothecary has his own sort of secrets to keep, and I'll kind of leave it at that. But I did enjoy the fact that suddenly he's more of a presence. He was almost like the town drug dealer in this version.
Yes, we very specifically lean into herbal medicine, not drugs. But that's so. First of all, I thank you for that too. I wish I could lay claim of authorship, but the authorship of how we expanded that character really does go to the great Dan Fogler, who plays him. I'd worked with Dan before. Such a brilliant stage actor, comedy actor, just beautiful in a Complete Unknown, but obviously fantastic piece. But I remember when I was working on the character with Dan, we really were leaning into kind of the the herbal guy who could give you, remedies for anything that you needed. And it was really him who said, as we started talking about where we wanted the story to go, said, there was a very interesting thing going on at this time, at this place, specifically with a particular community that he gets involved with. And again, not to try to spoil that because I think it's a fun piece. But we really expanded that character extensively to really give him his own life. And
he has his own song.
Goes out to Dan. and he and the great Derek Jacobi, which is probably one of my favorite things in the world. When we were casting Derek, I was like, but you'll have to rap. Is that okay? And I said, and I might have people throwing pillows at you and putting stuff in your face. And he was like, that's why I want to do the role. So to be able to do that, they do a number called I Should Write This Down. And what a wonderful song number. And it was always to me sort of like that mid-film showstopper that, if you look at it, great stage shows, whether it's Hamilton when the king comes out, or Master of the House from Les Mis, I always felt there's a great place for that, a little bit of a thirst quencher, and boy, did Dan and Derek knock it out of the park.
Well, and Derek is such a lovely man. I've had the pleasure of meeting him.
The sweetest
he's been a
human
guest
in life
on this program in the past. So he's a lovely man. And I did, and my wife has met him as well. And I turned to my wife and I said, I wonder what that conversation was like. When it was, oh, by the way, you're going to sing sort of in this musical number. And, Derek, God bless him, he's in his early 80s, and I thought, wow, that had to be a very interesting.
By the way, early 80s on the top of a mountain. It's a whole night. The whole film, with the exception of a handful of days, was all night shoots. So truly, for a gentleman of his age to be out there at literally 3:00 in the morning on the top of a mountain in cold and snow. I mean, what an unbelievable trooper. But the conversation was so interesting because I looked at those things that you just articulated as, I looked at them fearfully, like that would be the thing that would turn him off. But this is precisely what turned him on to the role. In his own words, he says, look, Shakespeare is always meant to find a new window into what he was after. And he says, and that's what you've provided here. And yes, I've been doing Shakespeare all my life, but I keep doing it because I keep looking for new windows. And boy, have you created one. So it's precisely what we were doing that attracted him ultimately.
That's fantastic. I started thinking about all of the musical films that I know of where there were, actors involved or characters involved that needed to sing, but weren't necessarily voices. And I just, and I laughed and I said, well, you know what? He nailed it. There are so many failed moments in film musical history, and he nailed it. It's a fun song. I'm glad you mentioned, because I wanted to ask you, because you did mention Master of the House and you mentioned Hamilton. And I wanted to ask you, in the process, and obviously this is probably a better question for your brother, but I'm sure you must have been involved. Is there, to some degree or any degree, some sort of musical theater formula that you felt needed to be followed with regards to the number of songs, the style of songs, how many solos the leads get, the duets, the fugues where you have multiple choral voices involved, this comic number between the apothecary and Friar Lawrence? Tell me a little bit about that. Is it Disney-esque in a sense that is followed? Is it Broadway that is followed? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh my gosh, I wish I could tell you we had anything to follow, but I would say it is almost the 100% opposite of that, where we watched everything, we consumed everything, to obviously be aware of it. But I always sort of say, I always think there's kind of two kinds of musicals, right? There's the musical where the milkman is singing, and clearly the milkman knows he's in a musical, but so much so that his cow seems to know he's in the musical, so he's singing too. And that's not what we wanted to do. When I look at something like Greatest Showman, and I think, okay, that's definitely in our world. I look at something even like La La Land, which is more about internal voice, I think, being expressed. That was interesting. But ultimately, we were doing something completely different. We couldn't find a good paradigm to follow. We couldn't find something that was really analogous. And by the way, we wrote Beat the Same a decade ago. We wrote I Should Write This Down, the song you were just referring to with Derek and Dan, in the middle of production a week before the show had to shoot, where I suddenly felt, oh my God, I feel like I'm missing this key story point now that I've kind of played out the last month or so of production. And I'd called my brother, who was on location with me, and said, look, we're at the top of the mountain. You got 4 days before I shoot the scene. Can you write me a new hit? So it wasn't like we were following something specific, but even to the point which I felt was really rather unique. And I love that you brought that up. There's a wonderful song called Mask I Wear, which is sung by all the women in the film. And it really is about their inner struggles with having to live the lives that are foisted upon them. So it's about the mask one must wear, the crown one must bear, and Rebel Wilson kind of leads us, but all the women are in it. Normally, I think in a musical, you'd write the song and then you just kind of bring it to your set and you'd shoot it. This, even though it was sung by 5 people, so it's an ensemble, to me, it was 5 individual solos. So I would have each actor sing the entirety of the song as if it was truly a solo, giving me the flexibility and editorial to decide what line, what moment to be on which character. So there was never a rule of it should follow this particular thing, or we need this number of songs in the piece. It really was, where do we feel this song is informing story? But even to that point, there are songs that are like 4-minute songs that I've put into an 18-minute sequence, like Streets Are on Fire, where you are literally starting with a chorus and suddenly you are now back into score, and that goes on for a couple minutes, and then a new verse comes up. Excuse me. So there were no rules other than how do we feel the music speaks to the inner voices of these characters? How long has it been, do we think, since the last one of these inner voice moments have been? How do we ultimately explain to an audience slowly but effectively that these songs really are inner voice, which I think is really important. There's a big song called Beat the Same, which is the first big love song with Romeo and Juliet in a church. And they sing. So they meet in the church and they start singing, and then Juliet's on her way back to her castle and Romeo's from the church, and they're singing separately but together. We're intercutting back and forth. And I always sort of say, if someone happened into the church, they're not really singing. They're two young kids. They're probably, hanging out, playing around, as two young kids would at this point. But we wanted to start introducing this idea of inner voice early on. So it was more about how to explain the language of music in the film uniquely on this particular film. And it just didn't allow us to sort of go, let's just follow that paradigm or the people who came before us, which was both terrifying and probably the greatest experience I've ever had.
You have some wonderful star power in the film.
Yes.
I mean, for an independent film, there are a lot of recognizable names. We just mentioned Derek Jacobi. You just mentioned Rebel Wilson, who plays Lady Capulet. Great role for her too, by the way, in consideration of like the other things that we know her from. What a fabulous choice, not only for the film but also for her as an actress. I think it's just my opinion.
Yes,
but
Rebel started out as a very serious stage actress in Australia and did a tremendous amount of Shakespeare. It's just part that her public doesn't know about her, but I knew about it. But still, it was a braver choice for her to say yes than it was for me to ask. But I thought, gosh, this incredible comedian who also has this incredible history of being a serious stage actress. And we had a very different approach to Our Lady Capulet, which I thought gave her quite a bit to work with. But that was absolutely wonderful. Jason Isaacs, of course, as Lord Montague was amazing.
And the two Ruperts.
Rupert Everett,
people
Rupert
will
Graves.
recognize both Rupert Everett
Absolutely.
and Rupert Graves, I think, from other things that we all tend to love to watch. Yeah, I mean, there's some really wonderful star power in the film, some very strong performances. I did get a sense, it almost felt like when I was asking about the musical formula of it, and I love the fact that you said, there's so many different types of musical feelings. And the milkman analogy is really funny because it's true, right? I mean, you could almost go to like the Road 2 pictures with Bing and Bob where the fish and the camels actually sing, right?
Well, exactly. And those are great, but it's just, it definitely was a different kind of piece.
I felt there were shades of it. I turned to my wife and I said, have you ever seen that episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer where they're cursed and they can't help but break into song? And I sort of felt like these characters were impelled from within to have to sing their thoughts, almost in that sort of a flavor to it. Yep. And that's what I felt was, and you did sort of blend back and forth between them actually outward singing, and sometimes there were scenes where the singing was the background music and they weren't actually delivering the
exactly. Yes, and how and when we started to explain that and reveal that and rely on that, so that we ultimately understood that this music was inner, not external. So that was very tricky to do because we wanted ultimately to, when you're at the end of the day, there's two things going on in the film. It's a musical world. So when you suddenly are, in Verona Town Square and it's Friday night and there's real bands playing, well, that music makes sense to exist there. But then suddenly you're going deeper into a character and seeing clearly they're singing internally. Ultimately, we want the audience at the end of the day to go, gosh, this is really their inner thoughts and inner voices. So we did play with when we had them actually singing visually, or when the songs were really playing within their heads and they were not singing, all in an effort to kind of help kind of guide the audience along in what it was musically that we were doing, which was very challenging. And hopefully people will respond.
Are those decisions made in the script process or are they made in the shooting process?
They're absolutely made in the script process. They were unbelievably, painstakingly agonized over. That doesn't mean once we shot it, and certainly once we started editing it, we didn't play with it forever, because we did, and kept looking at different things that worked or didn't work. But that was absolutely conceived from the jump.
How important, if at all, is it to have a hit, like something that might receive radio play, something that might be listened to or enjoyed outside of the context of the film? Is that a consideration at all in writing a score for a movie like this? Is, okay, this is our one that's going to be our pop hit that might transcend the film and become something people want to listen to or buy a record or, download for their digital players,
On this film, it was unbelievably important and unbelievably focused on from the beginning, because we were not writing musical theater. We were writing pop hits, because the younger generation tends to listen to pop hits as their music of choice more than necessarily musical theater. So we wanted to be the language that they're used to. And we were bringing in some of the top pop songwriters on the planet to do it. So we always said every one of these songs need to exist as a 3.5 minute, radio cut, just from a creative standpoint.
It feels from that way.
Pure marketing,
obviously not the Apothecary song. I don't think that one's good. I don't think that one has legs.
You're right. You're right. That's probably the most musical, right, of the piece. But every other song is meant to be truly a pop hit that you can hear on the radio or Spotify at any moment. But from a marketing standpoint as well, and we bring up marketing because, and I say this often, if people love movies, they have to go to the movies. If they don't go to the movies and they don't go opening weekend, we can't keep making them for the theaters. It's all going to be stuck on our phones. And so, we're in this weird time in 2025 when even figuring out how to reach an audience, when you talk about like rules or guidelines, there's nothing clear anymore that works. We can't depend on anything anymore. So when you have something that organically lives in multiple places, like this music, it lives as original, pop hits on the radio, it lives as it exists in our film, then yes, having it be able to coexist, but exist, prominently in its own space is helpful. And we certainly hope that reach expands the reach and interest in the film itself.
And which of the songs do you sort of place your chips on, do you think? Which one has the best chance, would you say?
Gosh, I really think there are a number of them, and that may sound disingenuous. It's really true. I've been listening to these songs for years and years.
Yeah,
it's really editorial. I haven't been able to get them out of my head. But it's
you probably wake up with one in your head and go to sleep with another one in your head, right?
There's nothing more fun than sitting with a 400-person Italian crew. That when you break for lunch at 4 a.m. and they're all bopping around singing the song, you're like, yeah, I think there's something there. But in terms of probably my favorites, look, I think this wonderful song, Beat the Same, is such a beautiful love song. And it's so powerful. And I really think that has great opportunity.
That's the opening duet. That's the first duet.
That's the opening duet in the church. Not the open duet, which is a song called Stranger, but it's the song where they first really meet in the church. Right. And we play it a couple times throughout the film. And I think that's a very powerful one. I also think this song, The Mask I Wear, which we just released, that really headlines with Rebel Wilson, but these other incredible women, is such a song of empowerment. And I really think it packs a wild punch. But I also love this song in kind of the club that we call it, called "What If I Loved You," when all the kids are hanging out and singing about their lives at that moment. So I mean, look, there's others, but I think those three definitely pop up for me.
Some interesting lyrics in that song. They're basically, it's basically a brothel, right? I mean, that's what it's supposed to be. And I love how they're like, I forget the actual lyric, but something to the effect of, it may not be love, but we certainly do it right. Kind of a thing happening there.
And it may be love tonight, right? So it may not be forever,
right.
But it may be
it's
tonight.
It's going to feel good. No matter what, it's going to feel good while we're doing it.
Yep.
Is sort of the theme or the flavor of that, right?
But it's so interesting as a struggle overall with some of the Shakespearean themes, the question of first love, right? Love at first sight. And if you go back from Zeffirelli to Baz to all the other versions, two people look at each other and that's it. And the world is gone and love is everything. And there's a truth to that, right? Now, is it love? Is it lust? There's a truth to how the younger generation can instantly fall with one another. I thought it was incredibly important to establish a world and environment that felt as real to people today on what a Friday or Saturday night would be. And that song is really meant to give you a real window into what their energy is, how they view life, how they view one another, so that when these then relationships start to form and evolve in a much more serious way, it feels like it makes sense, and it feels like it came from a world and a place that makes sense. So we're playing with every one of those ideas.
Well, I think that's the reason why the play has stood the test of time the way that it has. I mean, I always joke with people, especially whenever I'm teaching the play to young people. I always joke and say, and you make a point of this, they know each other for 36 hours.
Yes.
That's it. And they're dead. That's it.
It's
the greatest love story ever, except that they know each other for less than 24 hours. They're married, and they're married for less than 24 hours, and it's over.
Except we did something that I think one feels in the film. I don't hang a lantern on it because I didn't want to make it about that. But yes, historically, that is the story, right? This takes place in 3 days. These two people who have never met and fall madly in love, and then they're gone in 3 days. Now, obviously, our story takes some twists and turns that, you mentioned at the very beginning that it was a joyful and kind of fun experience. And I would argue to anybody, if you're worried because you think there's some dark things, there are, but there's probably some lighter things you weren't planning on, and you should go check it out because I think you'll be pleased. But, the overall idea of young love, I felt was true, but I thought, as you said, while I was in Verona in early pre-production and they were taking me around the real place saying, this is where we believe Romeo's house was, the character that this is based on, this is where we believe Juliet's house was. And I would sit there and go, and you're telling me in the 13 or 14 years of Shakespeare's text that they didn't bump into each other? They're 2 blocks away. How is it possible that these two prominent families never coexisted if that's what history was? So was there the possibility that these two may have known each other when they were much younger and had some sort of symbiotic kind of path in life where they both were living parallel lives, where the expectations on both of them were similar, but that Juliet, which would have been similar to what wealthy families of the day did, was sent off out of Verona to study to prepare her for marriage ultimately. But as a result of that, while yes, their first interaction is love at first sight, what I believe we learned rather quickly is, no, they actually had met earlier. They actually knew of one another when they were younger. And there was a part of that collective journey that by the time they meet in our movie at this time, perhaps nobody else in the world could ever understand the same weight and obstacles that each one of them individually were dealing with, which gave them this incredible opportunity to share that with one another, which I felt was a deeper relationship than just meeting, love at first sight and having this play out in 3 days. So I was really playing with how these characters would have really existed, how they may have really met, when they really would have met, and how all of that would have played out.
Well, I think Shakespeare does address that a little bit in the text. I mean, obviously in 14th century Italy, young virgins were cloistered up at home. They didn't go out in public hardly at all.
And that is true. And I just sort of play with the idea, like, did she never go out, to the market? Ever?
No. I mean, in fact, there's a moment.
They were locked in cages.
There's a moment in the text where the nurse says, have you leave to go to shrift today? So the only time you get to go out is once a week to go to church to confess your sins.
Under guard. Which we have in that relationship with her, going back to see the friar. But yes, those were things that I really tried to expand upon in terms of what might have been possible and what might have been real at the time, which I thought were, is interesting. One of the characters I really wanted to introduce in this film, and the film is meant to be a franchise. It is meant to go to some other places. And I still ended up referencing him quite a bit, was the great Dante Alighieri. And in my research of the great, for people who don't know, Dante Alighieri, of course, goes on to write the Divine Comedy. But during this time of 1301, the real Dante Alighieri had this very strange relationship with this horrific Pope Boniface at the time. And at this particular moment per history, was excommunicated by Pope Boniface and ended up summering in Verona at this exact same time, which would have meant the real Dante Alighieri would have likely encountered the real families of the Montagues and Capulets at this time, while, by the way, he was suffering from writer's block, trying to write the Divine Comedy. So there's all these wonderful other historical characters that moved in and out of this world. And in our attempt to really expand the world, it really was an effort to introduce some of these characters and some of these themes beyond that, which I just thought was fascinating.
Well, you talk about the fact that obviously it's Romeo and Juliet. There is death involved. We all know that. It's part of the formula of the Shakespearean tragedy. And I always like to say the reason we go to see Shakespearean tragedy, even though we know the end, is because we want to hope for a different outcome while we're watching. And if the actors are doing their job, and I tell actors this all the time, you cannot telegraph the tragedy. You cannot play the outcome. You don't know the outcome. Your character is full of hope for the best. And if you're playing the roles correctly, that hope infects the audience and they gain that hope as well. So that then when the tragedy does result, that's the catharsis. That's what Aristotle told us was why this is the greatest form of art ever, right? And so I think what you do here with your film, of course, is you're planting plenty of those seeds of hope. And even though we do see these tragic deaths that occur, I mean, the body count in this play is pretty high. We see these deaths occur and they're more traumatic to us because of the amount of hope that is infused in us as an audience while we're viewing the story unfold.
I think that's so 100% right on every level. And it was so much about what honestly drove me from the beginning on how to approach it. When I directed it on stage, almost exactly the words you just used, my kind of barrier, my bar of success was when I looked at the audience and really saw their eyes and felt, oh my gosh, for this moment, there's been a suspension of disbelief and they're sitting there, you can tell in their eyes going, maybe this time it'll work out differently. Maybe this, if you do it right, which of course, what's so brilliant about Shakespeare version is the first lines of the play are basically like, let me tell you what horrible things are about to happen. And then your job is to try to walk that back for the next 2 hours and go, but this time, maybe that's not going to happen. And ultimately, again, without blowing kind of where we're going for people who haven't seen it, and yes, there are some serious tragedies. I felt the tragedies only mattered if the hope was properly set up, if the potential for other directions was real, and making it real when you've kind of started by going, here's how it's going to end, even if you decide to end it, in a more interesting way in terms of where a story and characters might go, was everything. But that balance between someone definitively, even, someone going, hey, do you want to go see this new movie? And they're like, oh gosh, that thing where all the people die. There's an instant, kind of reaction people have. And what I would just urge people is, yeah, there's some tough stuff, but most of it, you'll be smiling, laughing, and stomping your feet.
And you might even come away singing a tune or two.
And you might even sing a tune or two.
Which, of course, is one of the goals.
Absolutely.
You make a choice with Mercutio that I found very interesting. You place him firmly inside the Montague camp.
Yes.
He is no longer a cousin of the Duke, sort of an outsider of the two families who is a friend to Romeo. You make him, they refer to him as his brother regularly. I think that's metaphorical though, right? Like you're not actually.
Well, we do. It's quick.
Montague.
He is a cousin. And we do reference him about being a cousin, and we reference his father, who was very challenging to him and, drank and he had no relationship with him and therefore was in essence the adopted brother by Lord Montague. And so he became brother in essence, but he's not meant to be brother in substance,
sure.
Only in essence with Romeo. But so we do reference him as a cousin, but very quickly, to me, the world of Romeo needed to be far richer, deeper, and more real, which meant who was his best friend? Who were his best friends? What did they do? And Mercutio, for me, was so crucial, played by the amazing Nicholas Padani. I just thought that character was everything to make the whole film ultimately work.
He's great. He's very solid. He gives a very compelling performance. His scenes with Lord Montague are fabulous and almost, I think those scenes become more important than the scenes between Tybalt and Lord Capulet, which generally in the Shakespearean text are so important. And so you sort of do a reverse there to some degree, I feel, with the way that you told the story. And I think that's a great choice that doesn't really corrupt the tale in any way other than it changes the Duke's investment in the outcome at the end.
It absolutely does. And yet I do, my choice ultimately was, gosh, for Romeo, this young guy, to have a best friend to really connect with and speak with feels real. And I get that. On the other hand, for Juliet, this young woman, although she would have a relationship with her cousin Tybalt, probably wouldn't be the same degree of correlation and connectivity, especially if she's been away, which in our version she is. So that also spoke to a little bit where the balance shifted. But yes, clearly I'm triggering a different direction in that Romeo Mercutio relationship.
You increase his camp of friends too. I mean, generally it's Mercutio, Benvolio, Romeo. It's the trio, but you add a couple of other, friend characters, sort of, the boys type of a thing.
Yeah,
which I
Tommaso
think,
played by Alex Sprack and Zach Bellwood, who plays Leopold. Yeah, we expanded the Montague boys for sure because there was going to be so much weight on that community and that world of these young guys.
I think that's something every director of this play, the Shakespeare version, would love to do, but generally we don't have the available bodies to do it.
Yeah. But it's important because when you start from and again, ours is not the text, but ours is still the essence. So when you look at the text, though, Romeo just kind of wanders in the beginning, pining over another woman, then immediately falls in love with this other woman, and he always seemed to me, even when directing it, a little bit apart from the rest of the boys. And I just thought, I just didn't feel that for film and for this particular version, that was as rich a world as it could be and tricky about what you then keep and don't to be able to infuse those things. But I thought that was incredibly important to do.
Well, and that is a reminder for my listeners. There is very little of Shakespeare's text involved in the film. As Tim says, it is the feel, it is the flavor, it is the historical aspect of it. There's the references we made earlier, as he mentioned, to Bandello and Brooke and others. So don't go in thinking you're going to hear all of those famous lines. You do, however, though, throw in a few Easter eggs here and there, including,
for sure.
And I think the first one is actually Romeo reciting the title of a different play as one of his little quips. And I found that funny. Of course, I got, my wife and I, who are big Shakespeare buffs, we're sitting here, we're giggling, we're finding the Easter eggs. I wish there had been more. My personal,
that was such a trick and a challenge of how much is enough, how much is too much. I didn't want it to ever feel foisted upon the piece. I wanted to feel organic. I don't know whether you picked it up because it was a little bit lower in the mix, but during the big fight scene where the Capulets and the Montagues square off in the town square, one of the Montagues, Tommaso, says, "Did you just bite my thumb?" Right, which is one of the famous lines. So there's a bunch of those that I thought were important, but something obviously as consequential as what's in a name. That was such an important question and such an important thing for multiple characters to play with. So I found the things that I thought were both consequential to story, as well as some things that I just thought were really fun Easter eggs, as you just mentioned, for people who like this work, which I wish I could, claim authorship for the concept, but really Tom Stoppard that so brilliantly long before I did, to be able to pull things in that he thought were, even Veronica, mentioning things about, I'm not going to write soliloquy for you. She's obviously referencing the great works of Mr. Shakespeare. So I wanted the world to be comfortable for people who exist almost always in that world, who just love that world. But I wanted it to be opening, and I wanted it to be accessible to people who just haven't yet.
Well, I'll tell you, Tim, one of the things that I found so encouraging as I watched the film is that I believe is going to open the door to an entire new group of young people who have maybe seen the 60s version, Zeffirelli version, because a high school English teacher made them watch it. They've maybe seen the Luhrmann version, which is now far older than we want to admit.
Amazingly, right? Like in a blink of an eye.
It's like, whoa, wait a minute.
Old.
That movie's like 30 years old now. How did that happen? How did that happen?
I know DiCaprio's 50 now, right? He's not the 15-year-old. It's crazy.
Yeah. So, that's shocking, right? In itself. This becomes a new version that is accessible to young folks, that is going to intrigue them and hopefully from my position, inspire them to want to dive into the original text, to want to try to understand it better, to be able to absorb and decipher the Elizabethan language and find the richness of Shakespeare's original work, inspired by their love for this movie and its pop songs and its depictions of these characters.
I have to say, and as I'm sure you can imagine with the movie, well, technically when we're speaking, the movie's coming out this weekend, we're now a week after it. But in all of the interviews that I've had, and I've had quite a few, nobody has said that. And that's perhaps one of the most important things that someone could take away from this, and thank you for bringing that up. When I was a younger man, right, even going back to my school, all we had other than the play that our homeroom teacher, that our English teacher gave us, right, was Cliff Notes. So you'd go out and you try to, it's not like you were necessarily cheating on the test, although yes, maybe some of us were cheating on the test, but ultimately, I guess that's true. But it's because
I think I just heard your confession.
Hard. You heard my confession.
Yes.
Exactly. But it is hard, right? Understanding iambic pentameter does take work. And I think far too often it becomes an instant barrier to people who it's just too much to do. And so Cliff Notes in the elder day were useful. I think, yes, people would go and turn, if they suddenly had to learn this or someone wanted to read it, they'd go see the Baz Luhrmann version. And yet it's still in iambic pentameter, as is the Zeffirelli version. So that doesn't necessarily help you either. And so one of the things that I really always hoped and aspired to with this piece was, these themes are so fabulous. There's a reason it stood the test of time. There's a reason people keep looking at it. If I could create an avenue in to an audience that might not normally go the extra mile to try to dive into why Shakespeare was so brilliant, why his work was such a singular piece in all of history, then I could give people a real living experience to understand the world, understand the characters that then they could take to that other life. And I truly believe will understand it far greater and in a far deeper way. And nothing could be cooler than that.
Amen. I absolutely agree. And I can see how this could be, as a former high school educator, I could see how you could easily take this film and the assignment could be watch this movie, read the play, and tell me the differences.
Yes. Absolutely.
Write in your own words, 3-page essay on the differences between the two. And yep. I, as an educator, will know that you did both, that you actually did watch the movie and that you did read the play. And I will know that you did the assignment. And that's a real easy way to make an assignment out of it. And in a way that's going to intrigue the kids.
Inform, be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what I would be doing if I were teaching high school English class, which I believe in most states, freshman English are required to read Romeo and Juliet still. So
it's like 95% of all schools in North America. I mean, that's unbelievable that number of people have contact with this material, and anything that can be done to help people understand it more, appreciate it greater, is a good thing. It's a good deed.
It's currently slated for our 2026 season here at the Rogue Valley Shakespeare Company. So,
I'm sure it is.
There you go. Well, this year we're doing Hamlet and Comedy of Errors. Next year is Romeo and Juliet and Twelfth Night. So there you have it.
Excellent.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, sir, for taking the time to come and share these insights and your creative process with my listeners. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, the title of the film is Juliet and Romeo. This is the filmmaker Timothy Scott Bogart. Tim, how can they find it? What's the easiest way for them to find it? It is out right now as this is being aired.
It is out right now. So, and it should be in a theater near you. So, check out Fandango, check out Movie Phone. Obviously go to, Regal and AMC, wherever you're a member. But yeah, it should be out near you. And as I've said, I know you'll be hearing this podcast, after the release, but seeing movies matters. So even on the second weekend or the first proper week, go see them. Go see it. It really means.
How wide is your distribution?
But it also means we're about 1,500 screens this first weekend. So we're fairly wide. And then we'll see how we go from there, which is why it's so important for people to actually get in their cars, get in the subways and go.
And one of the things that I'll say to my listeners, who of course are Shakespeare files, that, that's the niche audience here. And one of the things that I'll say to all of you who are listening is it's not only important, as Tim says, that you go out and see movies if you want to see more movies, but specifically important to go out and see a film that is based on Shakespeare. There aren't a lot of Shakespeare movies being made anymore. And one of the reasons is it's hard to sell. It's a hard sell. It's hard to convince the Hollywood moguls, the producers, the distributing companies that this can have legs. So go out and prove them wrong. Go out, bring friends, grab 10 people and take them to see this film. Not only will you enjoy it, but you'll also be doing something for the future of Shakespeare on film.
Absolutely will.
Very good. Thank you so much, Tim.
Thank you so much. Great pleasure.
Hey, fellow Quillers, before we wrap up this episode, I want to cover a little bit of business. I will take all the blame. Yes, I will take all the blame, but I am going to chide you all just a little for not reminding me and keeping me on track. We are way behind in selecting our Quillers of the month. And those of you who are serial Quillers or above at our Patreon page, you certainly do deserve your opportunity to win the monthly drawing and that very coveted recognition. It's just a little something that we can do on our end to make sure you know how much we appreciate your continued patronage and support for the program. Some of you have been loyal Quillers since day one, and some of you have come along during the subsequent years to help us keep this quest into this mystery going strong. And we thank you and we appreciate you. And so we want to make sure that you receive the little bit of recognition that we can possibly give. There are multiple benefits to becoming a Patreon patron of the show at our Patreon page at the serial Quiller level or above. If you're not familiar with that, you can go to the Patreon page and find out more details. But here's some of the benefits. One, you get the knowledge that you are assisting with offsetting the production costs of the show and helping it to keep going as we bring in new guests, new topics, and new audience members. You get the knowledge that you are helping to spread the word about Shakespeare authorship to new Quillers every fortnight and assisting others on their personal journey into the mystery. You gain access to our growing library of bonus feature episodes, including movie watch-alongs, deep dives into specific works in the Shakespeare canon, performance pieces, biographical analysis, and more. In fact, so many of you have contacted me, and I thank you for your emails about it, about the 2-part series of bonus features I did on the details and mysteries surrounding the death of Edward de Vere. Seems like that's been a favorite of many of you serial Quillers, and I'm pleased with that. I'm glad that you all have enjoyed those 2 episodes. It was a very intriguing deep dive that for me to do and to find out things that I didn't know, and always a joy to share that information with you. Last but not least, as a serial Quiller or above, you are entered into our monthly drawing for Quiller of the Month, which we are way behind in. Now, there are some good reasons for that. I'm not making excuses, but I want to give you a little background, a little bit of insight into how the show works. Sometimes episodes are recorded far enough in advance that we're not always sure when they're going to drop, and whether or not when they drop, it is going to be an episode where we are called upon to choose a Quiller of the Month for that month. Sometimes episodes can pop up as an unplanned opportunity, such as this one with Tim about Juliet and Romeo. And we fit it into the lineup right away for reasons such as the very recent release of his new film. That said, let's get caught up, shall we? So today, with the help of producer Jake and the Wheel of Destiny, we will draw for Quiller of the Month for both the months of March and April. Double the wins, double the acknowledgement, and 2 loyal Quillers get to select a prize from the Quiller Swag Shop. Jake, take it away.
Thanks, Stephen, and hello to all of the Quillers. Very happy that we are going to be catching up here on our QOTMs. So without further ado, for the month of March 2025, our Quiller of the Month is Jen Swan. Jen Swan, longtime Quiller, multi-time Quiller of the Month, if I'm not mistaken. I think this might be Jen's second or third, which just goes to show you there is no limit to how many times you can be Quiller of the Month. Thank you so much for your continued support, Jen. You will go down in the record books as the Quiller of the Month for March 2025. On to April. It is No Fools, the April 2025 Quiller of the Month, Eva Varelas. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Eva Varelas. Eva, I think this is a fairly new Quiller. Thank you so much for joining the Patreon, for supporting the program. Congrats, you are the April Quiller of the Month for 2025. Both Jen and Eva, keep your eyes on your inbox, your email inbox. I will shoot an email to you within the next 24 or so by time of airing of how to claim your prize. Thank you and all of our patrons for your continued support of the show. We would not, could not, should not do this program without your support. Thanks again, and back to you, Stephen.
So there you have it, Quiller Nation. Next episode, we will select the Quiller of the Month for May. And also watch for that May bonus feature to come, the second part of my two-part exploration into Stephen Orgel's analysis of the book of the play in the age of Shakespeare. If those of you who have access to the library have not enjoyed that first part yet, I encourage you to go and listen to it. If you have, listen to it again, because part 2 will be coming by the end of the month. Plus, as we move forward, some exciting new guests lined up that I can't wait to share with you. A couple of visits from some old friends as well, who I think you will be happy to hear from again. And let's just keep it going, fellow Quillers. Let's stay out there. Let's keep spreading the word. Let's convert Shakespeare skeptics one at a time. More importantly, let's keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com.
It's Dragon Wagon.